Hello, hello, hello. Lovely to see so many of you here. Give me a little wave if you can see me. Hi, see Francesca waving. Great. And tell me where you are. So in the chat box, it's just getting dark. It's evening here in the UK. It's been a bit of a grey day. But in the chat box, let me know where you are, where in the world you are. Great. Home. Okay, Tuscany, Italy. Lovely. Lovely. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. Oh, wow, lots of different places. Indonesia, Jordan. Great. Argentina, Turkey, Moldova. Wow, we've got a great spread here. And as far as Scotland as well. This is great. Thank you for taking up, for letting me take up your time for coming along to this session. Hi, Kunzum. Hello. Lovely to see you from India. Great. Hopefully I'll see you face to face fairly soon as well. Albania, we've got Lithuania. Hi, Dahlia. India. Amazing. This is fantastic. Great. Well, yeah, welcome. Welcome to the session. It's great that you're so active in the chat box because I will be asking you to do a lot more of that. So keep using that chat box because your contributions are going to really, really help with this session. But yeah, it's lovely to see you all. It's lovely to see so many of you here. I'm just going to share my screen and I think we'll get started. So, okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Great. I got some thumbs up. People can see. Lovely. Great. So yeah, welcome to this session. Where we're looking at a series of activities, low prep activities, which I think is always good for busy teachers, isn't it? Things that are low preparation that we can plan pretty quickly and take into class. And also engaging activities. So we want our students to be really engaged, really participative, really interactive. So hopefully that's what you're going to take from this session today is lots of ideas. Great, everyone giving me thumbs up in the chat box that they can see. So before we get started, this session is being recorded. We will be sending out an email with a few different links to different things, little promos that we're offering you, a link to a website we'd like you to contribute to, but also a link to the recording of the session. So you will all get that. Now, you don't have to have your cameras on. You can. I quite like seeing people's faces, but that's entirely optional. But what I would like you to do is really get involved in the chat. Okay. So I'll be asking various questions at different points, and it'd be lovely if you just, tell me your answers in the chat. So my first question for you is, well, where are you? A lot of you have answered that question already, but tell me a little bit about who you teach. So adults, juniors, online, face-to-face, and also something that you've achieved recently that you're proud of. And that doesn't have to be teaching related. That can be anything. Let's celebrate those achievements, big or small. So great. We've got a few people telling me, hi, Mahmoud in Serbia. Hello. Hi. Juniors and adults. We've got some people teaching in schools, all levels, face to face. Virtual. Sorry, I disappeared there for a second. Yes, let me share my screen again. Let's pull that up. Okay, so I work for a language school in Southampton, a private language school called the Lewis School of English. And if you've heard of that school or if you've visited that school, give me a little thumbs up. Be nice to kind of see some familiar virtual faces. Great. Oh, Francesca, you were there last July. Yes, great. And I definitely recognize some of your names and faces. So I have kind of met some of you either at the school or online before. So that's great. You brought a group of students, Francesca. Lovely. Fantastic. And my job, I have taught adults and juniors at Lewis School. Currently, I work more with teacher training and predominantly online teacher training, but also face-to-face at the school in Southampton. So yeah, something that I've achieved recently that I'm proud of is that I managed to run for 28 minutes without stopping. I'm not a runner. It doesn't come naturally to me. So I'm quite pleased with myself for doing that. Any other achievements that you would like to, thank you. Any other achievements you would like to share in the chat, big or small? Doesn't matter. It could just be getting through the day. Oh, great, Kunzum. Yeah, proud to pursue your career as an ESL trainer. So very worthwhile decision. I'm glad that you're glad that you did it. Andy, proud of your projects with your students, especially drama projects. Fantastic. We've got some lovely drama projects on offer at Lewis School as well. Proud of your daughters. Great. Olga, you studied with us last year. Fantastic. Online teacher in the making. Hi, Marinella in Greece. Great. Yeah, thanks, Dahlia. So teachers should speak about their experience, stories. Okay, loads and loads of lovely, lovely things in the chat there. Oh, great. Yeah, so about being adaptive, somebody's just said about being posted to a very small town. And I think that's a big part of teaching, isn't it? Isn't being able to adapt to the context, the scenario, the resources that you've got. Proud to go on learning. Great, despite age. I like that. Age is no barrier. Yeah, no barrier. Fantastic. Lots and lots of lovely achievements. Well done to all of you for each and every one of them. So a little bit about this session. Hi, Berna. Hello in Turkey. So we're going to be looking at a series of classroom activities that can be adapted really to kind of focus on maximizing that student engagement. And although they're going to be presented as a series of activities that follow on from each other, equally, you could take some of these individual activities and use them in isolation. So they're ideas that you can pull apart, play around with, and we'll talk about how they can be adapted as well. And then towards the end of the session, I'm going to be giving you a bit of information about our Lewis Online Learning teacher training courses, which you may or may not know about. And the reason for me kind of using this opportunity to tell you about those is because we are relaunching them in 2025, which is very exciting. We've been running them online for 4 years now. But yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more about that later and a little promotional opportunity for you as well. So my first kind of question as we get stuck into this session is about using stories. So A, B, or C, how often do you use stories in your English lessons? So A, never, B, fairly frequently, or C, all the time? Okay, got some A's and B's coming in so far. Lots of B's. Good to see that people use them fairly frequently. Olga, all the time, that's fantastic. Okay. Great. So a lot of people are fairly familiar with using stories in the classroom, and there are so many benefits. I've put a few on screen, but yeah, feel free to add your own ideas in the chat if you think of any more. But what I love about using stories for language teaching is that they often have a lot of repetition in them, either repetition of key vocabulary or repetition of linguistic structures. And we know as teachers that repetition is essential for learning, but it can be a little bit tedious and a little bit boring. However, in stories, it can be a really engaging feature of a story to have a certain amount of repetition, particularly for young learners. And so I think that's a great way of encouraging that recycling of language. I think the other thing is that most of us, I hope you would agree, have engaged with stories from a young age. So I don't know about you, but I remember, my first memories being a child and having stories told to me. And, we engage them from a really young age. So why stop? They are engaging. Why should we not engage with storytelling when we're adults as well? I think they can really spark creativity and imagination. Sometimes we want our learners to use language, but coming up with ideas can be quite tricky. But if you take them into a world of stories, they start to use their imagination and suddenly they can get really creative with that language. I think it's a really great way of providing a context for language. So rather than just teaching words or phrases in isolation out of context, sitting that language in a story can make it really accessible to our learners. They can make sense of that language in a useful, meaningful way. And also they can remove the focus from the learner onto a character. So if we're encouraging our students to use storytelling, they might feel a bit uncomfortable talking about themselves. They might not, but there are cases where students perhaps don't feel quite so comfortable using the language to talk about themselves, but they can project onto a character and they're often, a lot more comfortable doing that. These are just a few reasons, but I can see some people have put other reasons in the chat as well, which are great. So helping students to relate to something, I completely agree. Young learners, especially, take an interest in stories. So, yeah, I think storytelling is something that we're trying to use more and more with all age groups in our classes. So we're going to do some activities which are based on using stories, but equally they could be done with any type of text. And just as an example, we're going to start with a live listening task. And I've just picked a text, a story, which I would typically use with B1 level and above. And we're going to imagine that the aim of this lesson is to help my learners become more confident in using narrative tenses. So the idea is that they've already learnt those narrative tenses, but I don't know about you, I find that when I'm teaching narrative tenses and past simple, past continuous, past perfect, students can demonstrate an understanding of it, but they're quite hesitant to actually use those narrative tenses. It's very easy just to stick to past simple, past simple, past simple, because they can. So I've chosen this activity to try to increase my learners' confidence in using narrative tenses. So that's kind of just the context for this activity that we're going to do. Now, what I would kind of say is that to start with, I'm just going to talk through a couple of versions of activities or a couple of different approaches to activities. And then we're going to try some of those activities out. So, okay, if I'm doing a live listening, I might start by using some pictures. So I show my learners some pictures and they need to predict what happens in the story. And Andy, yeah, we are going to send a recording of this session out. So I'm going to use some pictures, get my students to predict what do they think happens in this story. And then when I read the story out for the first time, they're going to be listening to check if they were very accurate with their predictions. After that, in version 1, I would read the story again, but this time we're going to really focus down into those narrative tenses. So I've got an activity I'm going to show you where the students would be taking notes based on the different tenses that they hear in the story. And then they will use those notes to rewrite the story. Okay, that's version 1. Now, version 2, so again, live listening, same story, same level, same outcomes. Again, start with pictures to predict the story, and then they would listen to see if their predictions were right. So far, this is looking the same. But instead of individual note-taking, I'm going to introduce a collaborative note-taking task, and I'll explain how that works in just a moment. And then rather than writing, I want my students to do a speaking activity. So I'm going to work on pronunciation first to give them a bit of confidence before they do this speaking activity. And the speaking is going to be a relay task that they do in groups. And I'm going to explain how this works in practice in just a second. But the idea really is that both of these versions are great. So there's nothing, we're not saying version 1 is bad, version 2 is good. But version 1, there's a lot of individual work. It's great if that's what you want students to work on and if you want them to develop their writing skills. But if we're looking for interaction, communication skills, student engagement, then I might choose version 2 instead. Let's see why. So what does this look like in practice? I'm going to show you some pictures. Imagine that you're my students and you're going to look at the pictures and see if you can guess what happens in this story. So here they are. I'm going to give you a minute just to think about it. You don't need to write anything down. Just have a think. What do you think happens in this story? And when you've got a few ideas, we're not going to share them, but just give me a thumbs up if you've got a few ideas of what you think might happen in this story. Right, we've got some ideas in the chat. So fantasy story, myths and legends. With my learners, I might get them to discuss it in groups, share their ideas in groups, report back to the class. Thanks, Francesca. So you've got a few ideas of what you think might happen in this story. Great. We've got a princess captured by a dragon. Fantastic. Okay, good. We've got some more people with some ideas there. A princess helps and rescues a prince. Lovely. Nice idea. Change through generations. We've got a fighter. Francesca, your imagination's going crazy. I love it. Okay, peace and then battles and a happy ending. Right, this is fantastic. We've got loads of ideas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read the story. Now, this story is the story of Guy of Warwick. This is a British folk story. Has anybody heard of this story before? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you've heard of it or not. It's not very, very famous, so I wouldn't necessarily expect you to have heard of it. So it's not an Irish folk story, but yes, it's a British folk story. Warwick is a place in England, and yeah, I'll read it to you. I'll read it to you. So it seems quite a few people have not heard of this, which is what I would expect. So have a listen, see if your ideas were close. Once upon a time, in medieval England, Guy fell deeply in love with the Earl's daughter, Felice. Guy had shown Felice his strength and bravery, but as she was noble and proud, she could only marry a famous knight. Although a mere villager, Guy set out to prove himself worthy of her. He travelled far and wide, slaying giants and dragons, and earning himself the status of a brave knight. Now he had made his name, he returned home to marry Felice. Though he had won her love, Guy felt troubled. All the fighting had left him uneasy, and he felt guilty that he had found his happiness through so much violence. He set off again, this time on a journey to find peace within himself. He lived humbly, becoming a hermit, and sought forgiveness for his violent past. He spent his time doing good deeds, protecting villagers from evil giants, and rescuing people in need. But all of this was done without seeking recognition or reward, and never revealing who he was. It was only after he had passed away that people discovered all the brave things he had done, including the love of his life, Lady Felice. She organised a lavish funeral for him, and from that day onwards, he was remembered as the brave knight who had fought for love and finally for peace. Oh, what do we think? Do we like that story? A few people in the chat saying they love it. It is a bit deep, Daniela. It is a bit deep. Not your typical kind of happy ending, but there we go. Okay, great. So my next question is, go back to your predictions when you first looked at those pictures. How similar were your predictions? So A, if they were not at all similar, B, if there were some bits that were pretty close, or C, yeah, whole thing, spot on. Dahlia, yeah, that's a great idea. Give the beginning, let students finish it. I like that. Great. We've got lots of people saying they got some bits pretty close. Great. Lots of love for the story. That's nice. Complete opposite, Kunzum, of what you had in mind. Okay. And obviously, don't forget, when we're doing this with our learners, it's not about them getting it right. It's just about them engaging with the story. So it doesn't matter if their predictions were completely wrong. We're just giving them a reason to listen, to see, you know, to tune in and pay attention and have some kind of reference that they're, you know, using as they're listening, rather than just listening with nothing, no reference point. Okay, so the next thing that I would do with my learners is say, right, we're going to listen again. This is in version 1, but this time I'm going to pause for you to make some notes. Now, if you want to do this, you can, if you've got pen and paper. But basically, this is how it's going to work. So I've decided for this lesson to just focus on differentiating between the past simple and the past perfect. Those are the narrative tenses that I really want my students to become more confident with. And so I'm going to read the story and I'm going to pause, and students have to listen out for verbs, either in the past simple or the past perfect, and just note them down in the correct column. Now, I would ask them to write the subject and the verb, not the whole sentence, just the subject and the verb. And I will pause a little bit, but really these are notes. They're not writing full sentences. So if you want to have a go, let's do it. Now, I'm not going to read the whole story, just the first half. And we'll do the example. The first is an example together. So once upon a time in medieval England, Guy fell deeply in love. So you would be writing this down. For example, number 1, just Guy fell. That's it. Great, Maddie. Yes, we've got past simple for that first one. And then I would keep reading. So Guy fell deeply in love. Oh, Andy, yes. Yeah, so just to clarify, they've already studied this grammar. This is to encourage them to use it more confidently. So we were talking a bit earlier about how they've learnt it, they've studied it, but they're not using past perfect, they're just using past simple for everything. So we want to build their confidence in using these tenses more creatively and confidently. So Guy fell deeply in love with the Earl's daughter, Felice. Guy had shown Felice his strength and bravery. But as she was noble and proud, she could only marry a famous knight. Although a mere villager, Guy set out to prove himself worthy of her. He travelled far and wide, slaying giants and dragons, and earning himself the status of a brave knight. Now he had made his name, he returned home to marry Felice. Though he had won her love, Guy felt troubled. All the fighting had left him uneasy. And we're going to stop there. We're just going to do the first half of the story. I would pause for longer, obviously, in a classroom, make sure students have got time to write down their notes. And then we would go through the answers together, and hopefully students would end up with a list that looks like this. So Guy fell, Guy had shown, oops. She was noble and proud. She could only marry famous knight. Guy set out, he travelled, he had made, he returned, he had won. Guy felt, and all the fighting had left him. So we'd go through this in class feedback on the board, make sure they've got all of those structures in the right columns. So I can see in the chat people have been really busy kind of answering these and putting them in the right column. So well done. Yes, that's great. Now, because it's a review, I would go over the form at this point. So remind them past simple, subject and verb 2, past perfect, subject, had and verb 3. So we do a little recap on that. But as Andy pointed out earlier, the assumption is they've already studied these tenses. They're B1 level. They're just not using them. So then I would reduce what's on the board to these 11 verbs only. What's the difference between the purple and the green? Any ideas? Pop them in the chat. Thanks, Francesca. Great, Daniela as well has said that. Right, so purple is past simple, green is past perfect, so the past participle. Great, so I'm taking away the rest of the structure and I'm just giving them little colour codes to prompt them as to when to use past simple, when to use past perfect. Great. And then as a class, we would see if we could piece together this story again. So we'll do a little example here, but if we were to start with the verb fell, can anybody remember what that sentence was? Who was the subject? Fell, what, fell over? What was that first verb? How was it used? Thanks, Victoria. Francesca, we've got Guy fell in love. Yes. Great. So we would, as a class, try and recap this story. So Guy fell in love. What about shown? So this was something about Guy and Felice. Something about being strong, being brave. So can anybody remember what that whole sentence was? So Guy had shown, which is great. Guy had shown what to who? Lovely. Guy had shown bravery. Yes. To who? Can anybody remember the name of the other character in this story? So he'd shown his bravery, he'd shown his strength to Felice. Thanks, Andy. What was the problem? Why did they not marry? So Felice, what was the situation with Felice if we look at verb number 3? So you're quite right. He wasn't a knight and she was what? Can anybody remember? Yes, Andy, she was proud. She was the daughter of an earl. She was troubled, maybe. Yes. She was noble. Great. These are all great answers. So with my class, we'd work on through and we'd piece together this story with these key verbs. And I would then go on to ask them to rewrite the story of Guy of Warwick with just those verbs as prompts. So they know they've got to use the past simple, past perfect. It's not a memory test. It's not about remembering every single detail exactly as it was, but they should have an outline of a story and they should have some key verbs to use, and they're going to be encouraged to switch between those past simple verbs and those the past perfect, the narrative tenses. So this is version 1. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly good series of activities to do. But it's quite individual. Students are working quite independently in that sense. And obviously focusing on writing practice. Yeah, Dahlia, you get them to make changes as well. Yes, get them to insert some creativity. So perfectly good series of activities, but what if I wanted a little bit more student interaction in my class and I wanted them to use a wider range of skills? This is where we might switch to version 2. So it starts in the same way. Look at the pictures, predict the story, listen, see if your predictions were right. But then rather than making individual notes on the second listening for the tenses, this is how I would set up this activity as a collaborative task. So who's this over here on the left, do we think? So if this is a classroom, we've got the board at the front. Who do we think this is over here? Okay, yes. So this is the teacher. And something, oh, okay. Yeah, so this is the teacher, or Guy, maybe, why not? And for the purpose of this activity, I tell my students, I'm not your teacher, I'm your audio player for this task. So I can deliver the story, but you basically control me. I've got 3 functions: play, pause, and rewind. And what I would normally do is physically remove myself from the center of the class to the corner or to the side, so that I'm not putting myself in the middle of the students as the central focus. I'm moving to the side and I'm telling them, right, you control me. I'm the audio player here. Now, collaboratively, they have to do exactly the same thing. They have to work out whether the verbs go on the left or on the right, past simple or past perfect. But they're going to do this as a team. Now, the first student will come up to the board with the pen, and the group will tell the student, the teacher, play. When they want to stop, pause. Right, what was that? Was it past simple? Was it past perfect? And they help the student at the board to write the correct verb in the correct column. So the student who's writing is just the nominated writer. They're not doing all of the work. They are the one that is putting it on the board after a group discussion. And after the first example, they give the pen to student number 2, who goes up and they play, pause, discuss. What did we hear? How do we spell that? And what starts to happen is you hear all of this discussion amongst students. So I think it's past simple. No, I think it's past perfect. Is it double L? Is it 1L? Oh, I don't know. What do you think? Right, let's rewind. Let's listen again. Let's see if we can listen to that bit again. And Andy, in answer to your question, this completely depends how many students you've got in your class. So you could do it as a whole class if you've got around 12 students, say. If you've got more than that, you might want them to do it in groups on a piece of paper, but discuss it together in their groups and have a nominated writer. So you could vary that depending on the size of your class. So it's exactly the same linguistic task as version 1. It's just that they're working together to achieve this. If you teach online, you could achieve the same thing by using an online whiteboard and getting students to annotate the board. Works in exactly the same way. Like before, we would then do a quick recap of the grammar structures that they've already previously studied. And because I want them to then do a speaking activity, I'm going to focus a little bit on pronunciation first. So what do these orange circles represent? Great, Kunzum, yeah. Stress, not stress like, stress is in, yeah, stressed words, stressed syllables. Great, so I've just picked 2 stress patterns. Pattern A, we've got 6 syllables with the stress on 3 and 6. So, And stress B, we've got 5 syllables with the stress on 3 and 5. So, So the next thing I would do is read some extracts from the original story, and students have to group them, group A or group B. So let's do that very quickly. You can put in the chat A or B. Tell me what you think. So the first one, Guy fell deeply in love. Guy fell deeply in love. What do we think, A or B? Ooh, got a few mixed opinions here. Guy fell deeply in love. Guy fell deeply in love. So it's actually A. Guy fell deeply in love. Right, number 2. Guy had shown Felice. Guy had shown Felice. We got lots of B's coming in here. Great. Yes, Guy had shown Felice. Number 3. She was noble and proud. She was noble and proud. She was noble and proud. Couple of different answers. So this one's A. She was noble and proud. She was noble and proud. Okay, the next one. Travelled far and wide. Travelled far and wide. Okay, most people saying B, which is quite right. Travelled far and wide. Travelled far and wide. He had made his name. He had made his name. Lots and lots of B's. I think that might be unanimous there. And the last one we'll do, he had won her love. He had won her love. He had won her love. Great, so that last one's column B. And you can start to see some patterns here. So students might notice that the auxiliary verbs are always weak. So Guy had shown, he had made, he had won. And also verbs like was, you know, auxiliary verbs. She was noble and proud. She was noble and proud. So this is just an example. Now, obviously, I would work a lot more then on getting students to practice saying these phrases, maybe testing each other on how many syllables they are, where the stress is. And then finally, we would move on to a speaking relay. Okay, so you can see that I've set this up with my students in groups. It doesn't have to be 3. You could do this in pairs, 3s, 4s. 5s, I would say, is probably the maximum to make sure students get enough out of the activity. But it doesn't matter if you've got like an odd number of students and you have one group of 2, one group of 3, that's fine. And basically what they need to do is they need to retell the story of Guy of Warwick in their groups. Now, student 1 in each group would start. It's not a memory test in terms of telling the story exactly as it was. The purpose of this is for them to practice switching between those past simple verbs and past perfect verbs. And those verbs I would normally keep as a reference on the board. So they can still see those, you know, key verbs, those 11 verbs, but they've got to, you know, create the rest of the story around them. Now, the student one would start. So, for example, once a man called Guy, or the story starts with Guy, who, and then when the teacher says change, or they clap their hands, or get their attention somehow, student one stops mid sentence and student two has to carry on the story. And it's really important that they are stopping mid-sentence and continuing. They're not going back and starting the last bit again. They've got to be really tuned in to kind of seamlessly carry on the story once the teacher asks them to change. Next time the teacher says, change, the next student takes over mid-sentence. And then when they get to the end of their story, they go back to the beginning of the story and they start again. So this is all about, right, just keep going and keep going and keep going to really kind of work on that confidence that we said, switching between tenses, and fluency. And there are some really, really interesting observations when I've done this activity. So the first observation is that learners become much more confident as the activity continues, because once they've repeated the story a few times, they've kind of got into a bit of a rhythm and, you know, they're a bit more relaxed about it. Also, they have to really, really listen carefully to each other. We often ask our students to listen to each other, but for this activity, they have to. They absolutely have to. So those active listening skills are really at play here. And the other thing is that they do become more fluent. I think it can be hard to work to improve students' fluency, because if they're very, very conscious about what they're saying and how they're saying it, however much we tell them to work on fluency, they might just be really, really hung up on being accurate. So the more times they're repeating the story, fluency starts to take over, actually. Especially if you start to change a little bit quicker each time, because they feel like they've got more to say in a shorter period of time. And the other thing I've noticed is, as the activity carries on, they start to get more creative and they start adding in little details, or maybe even inventing things that weren't in the original story. So, you know, as that confidence grows, as the fluency is coming together, they start to actually elaborate a lot more and add a lot more detail, which is really, really lovely to see. So yeah, Yilka, you've asked if it's called chain work. I call it speaking relay, but there may be other names for it as well. I'm not sure, but I'm sure the principle is the same. So we've looked at two versions, two series of activities. They're both perfectly good, but this session's about student engagement and, you know, interaction and participation. And so if we were to decide, right, why would I do version 2 instead of version 1? Well, I would do version 2 if I wanted to do a little bit more than just the listening and the grammar and the writing. If I wanted to introduce some soft skills, some teamwork, some active listening, some pronunciation, maybe version 2 is going to really push those skills that our students have got. But as I say, there's a time and a place for doing version 1, for doing the writing practice. So I'm not saying don't do version 1. It depends what you're hoping to get out of your class. Right. So another thing to address is that we've talked about the fact these activities are low prep. Well, let's have a think about that. So what lesson prep is there, in fact? Well, for both versions, version 1 and version 2 is the same. It's the same amount of preparation. Pictures to predict the story, but equally you could put words on the board, so you don't have to have pictures. You could just write earl, dragon, giant, hermit, you know, and get them to predict that way. Also, the pictures that I used today were AI generated, which was much quicker than searching for pictures that would have been suitable for that story. So that's, you know, I'm sure if you've played around with AI for text writing and picture generation, that also saves a lot of time. There is one copy of the text for the teacher. So the students don't need any copies of that, just one story for the teacher. Obviously, it takes time to select the best story for your students that's got the right language in it. And then really you just need a board, whether that's a physical board in a physical classroom or an interactive board, or a whiteboard online. Those are all the materials that you need. And this is why this is always my go-to activity. If I've been asked to cover a class, like really last minute, and I'm thinking, what am I going to teach? I've got 15 minutes and I've got to walk in and teach a 90-minute lesson. If I can find a text that I know my students will engage with, or a story that's got the language in that they're studying, then I'm confident I can just walk in with one piece of paper and do the rest on the board and still get them really using a really good range of skills. So, that low prep side of things doesn't have to compromise on the value that students are getting out of the lesson. And in terms of adapting, I've used B1, the story of Guy of Warwick, but I could have used the same text and decided not to focus on narrative tenses. I could have focused on vocabulary or linking words or passives or collocations or phrasal verbs. I just decided to focus on narrative tenses for this. I could keep the text and change the pronunciation focus. Maybe syllable stress isn't something my students struggle with, but there are some phonemes that they struggle with. Or maybe identifying the number of syllables or silent letters or intonation, intrusive sounds. So I could change what I choose to focus on in terms of pronunciation. I could use a different text if I don't think this story will engage my learners, but still work on narrative tenses. Or I could change the text, change the language focus, but still use this series of activities. So what I am trying to kind of promote are ideas for activities that are just a framework, and then you insert the content, you insert the text, the language focus, the pronunciation focus. But the series of activities in themselves will work time and time again, different levels, different texts, different language focus. Okay, so that's the first example. Now, similar thing, we're going to look at another example, but this time with a reading text. This time, imagine that it's an A2 level class, young learners, and I'm doing a reading to develop their reading comprehension skills, and also because I want them to focus on using adjectives to produce more descriptive language. Again, a version 1. Labeled pictures, because that's a good way to introduce key vocabulary, particularly at lower levels. Then they read the text to check their predictions of what they thought happened in the story. Second reading, I'd give them some comprehension questions to answer about the text. Then I would get them to focus in on pulling out adjectives from the text to match nouns. And then I would get them to put the text away, use those adjectives and nouns to rewrite the story. Okay, so that would be my version 1. Version 2 starts in much the same way. So labeled pictures to predict and then a first reading to check. Again, I'm going to introduce a collaborative task again here. It's still for comprehension, for reading comprehension, but I'm going to get students to work together. I'm going to add a bit about question recall here, and I'll explain what that is a little bit later. Same as version 1, find the adjectives task. But again, I want them to do speaking this time, so a bit of pronunciation focus first, and then an adjective competition to retell the story. So here's just an outline. Let's have a look at what this looks like in practice. So this time, these are my pictures. I've got labels on them because this is key vocabulary for my story. And I would give my students time to predict, what do they think happens in this story? And then I would hand out the text and say, right, well, you've talked about your ideas, read the text. What do you think? Similar, not similar? So they'd read it through and then, okay. So like the live listening, how similar was your story? Very, a bit, not at all. And again, it doesn't matter if it was similar or not. It's just to get them to engage with the text. And then, you know, we've all done this. We hand out our comprehension questions. I would try to make sure there's a variety of question types in there. So maybe some true or false, some open-ended, some multiple choice. And then I would ask them to identify 8 adjectives in the text that match the nouns that I write on the board. And you could get them to then draw pictures of those things. So this is a good comprehension task as well. If they can draw pictures that accurately represent the story, it demonstrates they understand the story. So I might ask them to pick out an adjective that describes the boy, and hopefully they'd find curious. An adjective that describes the attic, hopefully they find the word dark. The carpet, well, the carpet is old and dusty and beautiful, so 3 adjectives there. And obviously I'd do work with the students to make sure they understand the meanings of those adjectives, which leads into this kind of drawing activity. And then finally, with the adjectives and nouns, so curious boy, old carpet, dusty attic, they rewrite the story. Now it's A2. I'm not expecting them to rewrite it as the original, but just basic sentences. Samir was a curious boy. Samir went to the dusty attic. Samir found a beautiful carpet. You know, these kind of A2 appropriate levels, because level sentences, because what I want them to focus on is the adjective nouns. That's what we're looking at. So that's version 1, perfectly good. But if I want more student interaction, if I want a wider range of skills, maybe I'd go to version 2. So we know that that all starts in the same way. Pictures to predict the story. But instead of giving students 1 text each and comprehension questions, this is how I'm going to set up this activity. So again, I've put my students in groups. Doesn't have to be groups of 3. Could be 2 or 3 or 4. You're right, Kasama did have an adventure around the world with a magic carpet. So I've got my students in groups and they're called ABC, 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 and they have 1 text per group. Now, again, I think the key to student interaction is the teacher kind of removing themselves from the focus of the class. I've just noticed my cat's crept in. So the teacher's going to remove themselves from the center of the class. They've got the comprehension questions on a piece of paper, but the students don't. And the teacher would say, right, student A in each group, come over to me in this secret little corner, and I'm going to tell you question number 1. So question number 1, student A's, how do you know Samir is curious? How do you know Samir is curious? Student A goes back to their group and they tell them what that first question was. Right, how do you know Samir is curious? How do you know? And as a group, they have to look through the text and try to find the answer. When they think they've found the answer, student B has to go to the teacher to tell them. So not the same student, a different student. So we think the answer is Samir is curious because. And if they're right, the teacher says, yeah, great, well done. Right, here's question number 2. Go back to your group, tell them question number 2. And this can be set up as a competitive activity where the groups are kind of racing each other. And also what I like about this is you can grade, because you're giving the questions orally, you can grade them according to the level of the student you're talking to. So if you know that this student in this group is quite weak, you could grade your question so it's very simple. But if they're pretty good and you think they need a challenge, you could ask the same comprehension question, but make the language a little bit more complicated. Daniela, if they get the question wrong, then you tell that student that's not right, go back to your group and see if you can find the correct answer, and you repeat the question to them. And they basically keep going until they've answered all of those comprehension questions. So there's a little hive of activity, students coming up to you, telling you an answer, getting another question, going back to their group, working together, discussing it. Now, there are rules for this activity for it to really, really work well. The first rule is that I tell my students they're not allowed to use translators or dictionaries. They have to help each other. If they don't know a word, see if they can guess or see if they can help each other. But fundamentally, the comprehension questions shouldn't actually rely on them understanding every single word. So it's just about getting what they can from the text rather than going online and trying to translate everything. The second rule that I have is that students have to alternate. And this avoids that scenario where you put students in groups, but there's that one student that always dominates and does everything. This means that's not possible because they each have to take it in turns to go out and get the next question. So that is teamwork at its best, I think. The next rule is that students can't take the text with them when they go to tell the teacher the answer. The reason for that is that otherwise you will quite often get somebody in the group going, look, this is the answer, go, 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 tell the teacher, this is the answer. And then you get a student just coming and pointing to something. We want them to be able to tell you the answer in their own words. So that's why there's this rule, don't take the text with you. And if a student from one group is telling you an answer to a question and somebody else comes out, they have to wait until you've finished and that student has left before they can come and have their turn. And that's to avoid copying, hearing what the next question is before they're quite ready for it. But the good thing about this activity is that I do it quite a lot. So once students are familiar with the rules and they've done it once or twice, it doesn't need any explaining the next time. We do this with lots of different texts, and they know when we say, right, we're going to do a reading relay, they know, they're ready for it. So demonstration at the beginning when it's new is really important for them to understand how it works, but then you can just roll it out time and time again. Now, the next thing I would do with this version, so don't forget, students haven't seen the questions, they've just heard them. A bit of grammar practice, because question forming students often struggle with. Right, now you've found the answers in your text, you've circled the answers, can you remember what the questions were? And again, it's not a memory test, it's not word for word. This would be perfectly acceptable. You know, the teacher's question maybe was, how do you know Samir is curious? And maybe they would write as their question, why is Samir curious? And that's perfect, that's fine. It's just to practice question formation. And the whole time it's helping to embed the content of the text. They're thinking about the story and what happened in the story. Then similarly to the activity before where students take it in turns to come up to the board, I would do something similar, but this time identifying adjectives that match nouns. So they'd come up with, you know, old carpet, dark attic, one by one, discuss it. And we would then do a little bit of pronunciation work. So really getting them to practice those collocations, if you like, dark attic, curious boy, blue ocean, old carpet, warm water, beautiful beaches, golden sand. So emphasizing where that stress is, but also familiarizing them with those collocations. So that repetition is embedding them. And then finally, thanks, Maddie. Yes, really, really good. Finally, I'd get them to put their texts away and tell the other people in the group the story in their own words, really focusing on those adjectives. And the other people in the group have to listen and count how many adjectives they can hear, and the most adjectives wins. Now, don't forget, the aim of this lesson is to get my students using more descriptive language. So ideally, they will use the adjectives that we've looked at on the board, but when it becomes a competition, they start adding in loads of extra ones as well, which is great. So it's really encouraging them to just throw in, so long as they make sense, throw in as many adjectives as you can, and that's going to help me achieve my aim of encouraging students to use more descriptive language. So we've got version 1, which is perfectly good. We've got version 2, and again, here's a little kind of breakdown of the skills that are at play here. So we've got, our prediction and our reading skills, but we've got a bit of grammar in there with question formation. We've got vocab, we've got pronunciation, speaking, active listening, because they're counting the adjectives of their peers, making this a communicative task. So there's just a lot more skills work. I'm not saying better skills work, just more. And here's a couple of pictures of some of our students in action doing these. And this kind of, again, leads on to the preparation question. What about prep? Well, for both versions, again, pictures to predict the story, as before. This time you need one copy of the text for the teacher and one for each student or for each group. What I often do is give them one per group during the activity, so they have to work together, but then give the students their own copies afterwards to take home. And a board, physical or online. Now for version 1, you would also need to have a printout with the comprehension questions on as well. But for version 2, that's it. That's pretty much all you need. A copy of the text and a board to work on. Similar story in terms of adapting it for different levels, ages, learners. You could use this same text but change the language focus. So instead of adjectives, past simple and past continuous, touch, feel, see, prepositions of place or movement. You could change the pronunciation focus. You could still work on adjectives, but use a different text if you don't think that story is appropriate for your learners. Or you could change the text, change the language focus, but still do those activities. So we've basically looked at some receptive skill tasks here, a reading task and a listening task, but we've managed to include the options for speaking or writing, grammar or vocab focus, and pronunciation. So lots of other language skills. But on top of language skills, that integration of speaking and listening kind of simultaneously, rather than doing one thing in isolation, we want to really kind of help our students to use this range of skills more naturally. Active listening skills are in there. There's a whole range of soft skills, so teamwork, leadership, negotiation, decision-making. We've also got teamwork, plenty of teamwork, lots and lots and lots of teamwork, communication, and creativity. So these activities kind of go beyond language skills and include a lot more than that. Now, we've looked at a British folk story and we've looked at a story for A2 learners. What I'm going to ask you to do after the session, not now, we're going to send you all an email, and there is a link to a Padlet page which looks like this. And what I would love for you to do is to share your ideas with each others about the types of stories that your learners would be interested in. And I've created 3 columns for this. So one for young learners, if you teach young learners, one for teens, and one for adults. And the idea is that with everybody contributing these ideas, we can use this as a resource. We can go away and get ideas from each other about stories that would be good to use in the classroom. So watch out for your emails. There will be a link to this Padlet page. And that's your kind of takeaway, if you like. Now, I really appreciate you coming and taking part in this session. And I know we're overrunning, so I'm going to try and be really quick with this last bit. But if you liked this session, we do run online teacher training courses, which are much in the same vein. They're very collaborative. And basically, they're for teachers of all levels of experience. Doesn't matter how long you've been teaching. They're interactive courses with international teachers. So it's not just an online course where you access material. You actually work with other teachers in real time. And it's designed to fit around your busy schedule. So although there is one live session a week, there are lots of online tasks you can do whenever you can. And then one live session a week where we all meet together as well. And our courses are either 2-week courses or 4-week courses. And you get support and feedback from a tutor. So like I say, it's not just a self-access course, it's a very, very interactive course with guidance from a tutor. The 5 courses that we have on offer, we have a course that focuses on pronunciation, so helping students with pronunciation. We have another one on communicative teaching and activities. We have a course on student-centered teaching, which is a 4-week course. Getting creative with resources, exploiting, creating resources using authentic materials. And a new course that we've launched this year, which is storytelling for teachers. So helping you to use stories with your learners in a range of really exciting ways. And it's because of this new course that we are basically relaunching our online teacher training programs in 2025. And because you've been good enough to come along and attend today, we would like to give you a 10% discount if you decide you would like to enroll on one of these courses in 2025. Now, if you enroll this weekend, you will get a 10% discount off any of our 2025 courses. So to do that, you can go to our website. We'll be sending an email with this information in it. You can find the course that you want to do and click to enroll, and it will ask you for a promotional code. And that promotional code is Lewis10. And that will get you a lovely 10% discount off any of our courses in 2025. For those of you that don't know Lewis School of English, it's not just online teacher training that we do. We have a school in Southampton. This is our lovely school. And we work with adults and juniors, as well as doing teacher training face-to-face and online. So Southampton, for those of you that don't know, we're right down on the south coast, as the name suggests. You've probably heard of Southampton because of the infamous Titanic. But it's a really, really great location to be. And we have adult courses as well as junior programs there all year round. And we also deliver the Cert TESOL course, the level 5 teaching qualification. And we also are very lucky to use the Winchester campus at the university for junior programs. And we have a face-to-face teacher training course there in summer as well, in July, if you fancy coming over to the UK. I'm a bit biased because I live in Winchester, but it is an incredibly beautiful city, very historical, and yeah, very well located as well. So thank you very, very much for coming. And you know, if you have any questions, I'm happy for you to email me. You've got my email address on screen there. I'm conscious I've taken up enough of your time here and now, but do watch out for your emails, because you will be getting an email with a copy of the video recording from today, a link to the Padlet page where I really hope you'll all go on and add lots of ideas that we can all share and learn from, and also information about our discount code, just in case you missed it, so that if you wanted to, you could go and take advantage of that offer. Okay, great. Thank you so, so much. Thank you for all your contributions in the chat and your lovely comments. And yeah, so you've got my email address. If you want to get in touch, I hope that I will see you either online or face to face again at some point. So enjoy the rest of your weekends. Thanks, everyone. Bye.